Good morning, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime Live. This is where we cover some of the most interesting live trials in the country today. And we actually have a very busy day for you today. We are anticipating a live trial. Not sure we're actually going to be able to play it. Not sure it's actually starting today, but I want to preview it for you right now. It's a case out of Ohio. I've mentioned it earlier in the week. It's the case of William Knight. It's a really strange details and tragic details nonetheless, but I'm going to explain it to you. So this man, William Knight, he's on trial for shooting and killing an unarmed man named Keith Johnson. Now, Knight went to Johnson's house after seemingly to recover a dirt bike that Mr. Knight believed was stolen from his son-in-law. So he went to this house to try to recover this dirt bike. An altercation ensued, and what happened was Mr. Knight shot Johnson. Now, he is on trial for his murder, but he is claiming self-defense. It's an interesting case. We have a short package to preview this case. We thought it might begin tomorrow, but in the off chance it begins today, we're going to make sure to cover it here on Law and Crime. Take a look at this short package.
The trial for the Streetsboro, Ohio man accused of shooting and killing an unarmed man in a dispute over a stolen dirt bike is set to begin next week. 64-year-old William Knight is charged with murder and assault stemming from an altercation with 24-year-old victim Keith Johnson. The dispute was over a dirt bike reportedly stolen in 2016 from Knight's son-in-law's garage. The victim had the pilfered bike in his possession and was attempting to sell it on Facebook, according to authorities. Knight and his family arranged a meeting with Johnson to discuss the sale of the bike when everything went terribly wrong. Knight alleges the victim tried to run over his daughter Michelle with the dirt bike when confronted with the stolen property.
Ma'am, they tried to kill my daughter.
Okay, hold on. Did you just shoot the man?
I had to. He was trying to.
Okay.
He tried to run into my daughter.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Johnson's family contends the bike was not stolen and that he purchased it from another seller. Is this a case of self-defense or cold-blooded murder? I'm Rachel Stockman for Law and Crime.
All right, everybody, let's break down this case before we get into the other cases that we're going to be covering here on Law and Crime. I want to bring in my very special guest for this morning, attorney Carissa Kranz. Carissa, it's great to see you.
Great to see you again, Jesse.
All right, as we anticipate the Ohio versus William Knight case, self-defense. Now, what I could glean from this is he was saying that his son-in-law and daughter were somehow in danger, and that is why he felt justified with the use of force. But when you have a man who's using a gun, and we know the victim is unarmed, do those cases generally work?
Well, if we pay attention to what just was said in that package, that he told the 911 dispatcher that the man on the bike, Mr. Johnson, was about to run over his daughter, that, is a dangerous instrumentality. That's a vehicle. So it'll be interesting to see. Right now it's all speculation. What really comes down as evidence in this trial, whether or not it was self-defense or cold-blooded murder, it's going to be interesting to see.
But do you think it's a factor, the fact that Mr. Knight was the one who came to the house, right? So he
came
started
to the house.
It in a way,
He came to the house. He initiated contact, and it'll be what we need to know and what we need to glean insight into is whether or not Mr. Johnson was fleeing from the scene with the dirt bike, which would show an act of retreating and not anything that would incite a self-defense defense, or was he taking this dirt bike to incite violence and to scare them and try to run over his daughter, and so he then pulled the trigger to shoot to save his daughter's life? It's going to be, who knows what the witnesses are going to be, if maybe the daughter's going to be a witness, if she was there and she was about to be run over. How did she feel at that moment? Did she feel there was imminent harm at that time? And I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. There's a lot of interesting details about this case, including the fact that I think Mr. Knight tried to plead insanity at one point.
Yes, and then they took that back.
Right, how did that work exactly?
He pled insanity, and then they had a court-appointed psychologist evaluate him. They deemed him competent to stand trial, and he withdrew his insanity defense. So there's also been some insinuations of racial undertones. Mr. Knight was white. Mr. Knight is white. Mr. Johnson was black, and They're saying that Mr. Johnson didn't know that the bike was stolen. So a lot of this is going to hinge on circumstantial evidence on whether or not self-defense will be a successful defense in this case.
And not to mention the fact that he was originally charged with involuntary manslaughter, and those charges were up to murder. I mean, the community was outraged at that.
Right, right. So they'll see how much of the intent they can prove, and then maybe involuntary manslaughter would be a lesser defense that he could still be found guilty of on the jury instruction. The prosecution may have upped the charge based on the facts during investigation, thinking that maybe they had enough to prove intent.
Well, it'll definitely be one to watch, and maybe we'll be watching it tomorrow, or maybe we'll be watching it today. We're going to keep a very close eye on that courtroom. If it should go live today, although we anticipate it may not, we'll make sure to go directly into that courtroom. We don't want you to miss anything of this case out of Ohio. Now, I want to talk about two other cases that we are covering here on Law and Crime. The next one is a case, the Claude Tex MacGyver case. Now, as you know, it is on break this week. It will resume on Monday. This is that case of that prominent attorney who's on trial for shooting and killing his wife, Diane MacGyver, by shooting her from the backseat of a moving car. But his team is saying it was all a tragic accident, that the gun misfired. Now, we've seen the prosecution keep putting on their case. They keep putting it on every day, and they keep trying to say that he killed her for a financial gain, a financial motive, and the defense has really been striking back against that. So when the trial begins back on Monday, we're going to cover it here on Law and Crime. Now I want to focus on our main case of the day. This is a case that concluded, but I really want to touch upon this. It is the Leon Jacob case out of Texas. Now, this case, the facts are so unbelievable. It makes this case incredible. This is a man, a former Houston doctor, who was on trial for hiring a hitman. So let's follow this. He tried to hire a hitman to take out his ex-girlfriend, Megan Veracas, as well as his new girlfriend's ex-husband, Marion Mac McDaniel. Facts get even stranger. It turned out this hitman was actually an undercover police officer. Not so good for Jacob. But that's not the story doesn't end there, because this new girlfriend that he hatched this murder for hire plot with, her name was Valerie McDaniel. She committed suicide in the days after her arrest with Jacob. Now, what you're looking at right there, those were the staged photos. Megan Veracas worked with the police to make it look like she was kidnapped. Mr. McDaniel staged his own death photos with fake blood to make it look like he was killed. And this was all to trap this defendant. We are going to replay this entire case for you today. It was such an unbelievable case. Me explaining it does not do it justice. So what we are going to do today, we are going to cover it from beginning to end, and we will analyze every single detail about it. So let's start from the very beginning with the prosecution's opening statements.
He emailed her. He texted her, all to no avail. He was not going to stop until he got what he wanted. And you'll see that throughout this case. Leon Jacob does not stop until he gets what he wants. He even goes so far as to have acquaintances of theirs try and contact Megan for him. He searches internet search sites for her to try and locate her. He tries to contact her through Facebook. When all those attempts to directly contact her are unsuccessful, like I said, he tries to get other people involved. And one of those other people is Laura Thurlow. He's obsessed. Now, Laura Thurlow is a family acquaintance of sorts. See, Laura works at a business where her uncle is good friends with the defendant's mother. And as a favor to her uncle, she takes on helping the defendant out. And at first she thinks it's only to do a criminal search. You see, the defendant at that time, when he meets Ms. Thurlow, is concerned that there's a criminal charge filed against him. They bring an officer named Javier Duran into the situation, introduce him to Motaz, and the plan is to have Javier introduced to the defendant as a hitman. And that's exactly what happens. So Motaz calls the defendant. You're going to hear several recordings. There's 12 total phone calls that are recorded. There are 2 personal meetings between Officer Duran and the defendant that are recorded. And you're going to hear them all. The very first one is Motaz calling the defendant to set up a meeting the following day to introduce the undercover officer. And it's at that time that the defendant brings up a second problem, Valerie's problem. Now, Valerie McDaniel is the now girlfriend of Leon Jacob. At the end of January into February of 2017, they've developed a romantic relationship. He's now living with her, and now he brings Valerie's problem into the situation. Now, at that time, Officer Duran has no idea what Valerie's problem is, but he's going to find out very quickly. He's going to find out the next day what Valerie's problem is.
That was the beginning of the opening statements in the Leon Jacob case, a former Houston doctor who was on trial for 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder. Again, I'm here with attorney Carissa Kranz. Carissa, we've seen these cases pop up more and more, these murder-for-hire plots. Why is that happening so much?
Why? I'm not sure, because people are crazy.
That could be a good reason.
But, you know, it is sort of a cop-out way to concoct a murder. And one thing that we're finding, as you and I were discussing a little bit earlier on break, how another trial was the Dahlia Dippolito one, which was a murder for hire, is that a lot of they're hiring cops, undercover cops. So while this cop-out murder plan of a contract killing seems to be happening more and more, what's also happening more and more is these undercover cops are catching them in the act. And it's interesting to see how they're getting around that. And I'm actually most intrigued about how cheap you can hire someone to take someone's life.
Well, but that's the price that the undercover officers were charging, right? So, I mean, it's not like...
But it seems to be the going rate,
well,
right?
It's interesting because people, I would assume, I mean, we haven't had any evidence that Leon Jacob tried to do this in the past. They know what the price is for going hitman. When you search the dark web for that, I'm not sure what the price is for a hitman.
It seems like you can get it for a couple $1,000s.
And they would take care of what you need taken care of.
Right. It's a cop-out way to do it, and it's a contract to kill, and it's an illegal contract between 2 parties, and yep, it's a way for someone to commit a crime without law enforcement to link them to the actual commitment of the crime. But the irony of it is we're finding more and more that law enforcement is posing as the undercover cop, which is directly linking them to the crime.
Is it so common that to do these kind of tactics like the police did in these undercover sting operations where they actually took Megan, they took Mac, the alleged almost victims in this case, and staged crime scenes? Is that something, is it always that elaborate?
I think that that's a way for them to get insight on the defendant's reaction and psychology, so they can get further into circumstantial evidence that this was a result that they may have, or that the defendant really would have wanted. And that's when experts can come in and a jury can look at how he responded and the circumstances of that response to see what he really wanted. You know, in this case, they doused the soon-to-be victims with pig's blood to make it look gory. And you heard the defendant take the stand in this case in his own defense. And even though the circumstances were stacked against him, there was one point where he said, well, he didn't necessarily want anyone hurt, but then he immediately dismissed that and said how important his career was and his perception was above anything else, so you do what you have to do. And he wasn't that surprised. It was cold-blooded murder. Right,
because this all started because Megan Veritas, who is Leon Jacob's ex-girlfriend, the one that he tried to hire a hitman to kill, she accused him of assault and stalking after the relationship ended, and he was worried that would jeopardize his medical career. So the fact that we know that is the situation, in the eyes of a jury, do they convict? That
goes to motive.
Do they just convict him immediately? As soon as somebody hires somebody to do something, whether that means to get her out of town, to intimidate her, to threaten her, in these kinds of cases, is it hard for the defense to say, well, he might have just hired her to do this, but he might have hired him to do this, but not to kill anybody?
Right. Well, right. He was hiring them to take care of her, whatever that means, to get rid of her, whatever that means. But in this case, not only did he take the stand, but they had audio recordings of the conversation with the undercover cop planning and scheming out this entire murder for hire. this entire killing for two people. Two people. So I don't think he really stood a chance. He might have said, I don't, he was out of the details, so he didn't really care how they were, taken care of. He just wanted to protect his profession, and he's already now a seriously failed doctor.
Right.
But whether you conspire to commit the act, or whether you actually commit the act, or whether you get involved in the details of how you wish that act committed, the point is he intended for his life and his profession and his livelihood to be protected at the cost and at the expense of two lives.
Right.
And the jury is not the jurors are not complete idiots.
Exactly.
I mean, I've prosecuted cases in front of jurors that I'm like, well, okay, I don't understand how you got to that verdict,
Right.
but no, in this case, I mean, the theatrics of it are incredible.
I know. Well, we're not going to give away what happened in this case yet because we want to show you the entire case. And again, this is the beginning part of the prosecution's opening statements. Let's play the second half of the prosecution's opening.
Marion Mac McDaniel. He's the ex-husband of Valerie McDaniel. They have a child together. And that's going to be important here in a minute. But she is now involved in this, and so is he, because the defendant is letting everybody know that there are two problems that need to be taken care of, not just one. The meeting takes place the following day. It's at an Olive Garden. Present at that meeting are the undercover officer, Javier Duran, Motez Aziz, Valerie McDaniel, and the defendant. And the purpose of the meeting is going to be very clear from the get-go to you. One of the first things the defendant says or asks of Officer Duran is, are you a cop? Are you a police officer? I have to cover my bases. Are you a cop? This is exactly what he says. Officer Duran says no. The conversation continues. And the conversation mostly focuses on Megan. And you'll hear that all options are on the table when it comes to Megan. All options. Kidnapping her, planting drugs in her car to get her in trouble, and ultimately killing her. The night after the meeting at her apartment, at Valerie's apartment, they decide to contact him about Megan being abducted. And it's at this point the defendant can really put his preference into action. During their conversations that night, this is the picture that the defendant gets. We have Megan. She's zip-tied, she's duct-taped. If there was any time for the defendant to say, enough is enough. Enough is enough, let her go, I don't want her hurt. I don't want her killed. Just end this. There were plenty of opportunities for him to have said that. But this right here is the last one. And he doesn't. Because he knows the end game in all this. Mac was going to die, and Megan was going to die. And Leon Jacob was going to get to walk away. Because there was two obstacles to the defendant's new life with Valerie McDaniel. It was Mac, and it was Megan. Mac could keep Valerie away from him by making Valerie choose between the defendant and her daughter. And Megan could make him end up in prison. Those were his problems. He expected them to both be dead. And when he was arrested, or in the early morning hours of March 10th of last year, he believed they both were dead. He's guilty of solicitation of capital murder for both Megan Veracus and Mac McDaniel. And at the end of this trial, we'll ask you to reach that verdict.
We are recapping the Leon Jacob case. What a case this is. Really unbelievable when you hear the details laid out by the prosecution and this former Houston doctor who was on trial for 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder. One of those was to try to hire a hitman to kill not only his ex-girlfriend, but his new girlfriend's ex-husband. It's a sordid love triangle, ladies and gentlemen. Let's bring in again Carissa Kranz. When you prosecute these kinds of cases, these solicitation for capital murder cases, it's a little bit different, I would imagine, than when you have a murder case. We know somebody died, we can try to point the finger at somebody who did it. Here, if you are saying this person had the intent to hire someone to kill another individual, don't you need clear-cut language, clear-cut evidence? I want her dead. I want him dead. What you hear from the prosecution, he said, you might not have those magic words, but couldn't it be argued that a lot of this is innuendo? And how do you really know what Leon Jacob really wanted? I mean, he said, get it done, do what Valerie told you. If she goes away, these cases go away. But again, is that enough?
Well, those words in context can imply what he wanted, and it is enough. So what we know is he formed intent. And then he took the action to hire someone to follow through with that intent. And then he was shown pictures of the actual act being carried out, and he didn't do anything to try to stop the act or change his mind. He just continued on and showed very little emotion, but protected his own life. So certain crimes like solicitation, conspiracy are known as attempts or incomplete, inchoate crimes. And whether or not they've turned into the actual crime that raises to the level of capital murder is how far they took the action to completion.
Right.
In this case, yes, you know, he said things insinuated, I don't want anyone to get hurt, but get it done, do what you have to do. And then he said other things that we heard about how he could kill her and stop her heart cold with, what was it, Clorox? Mm-hmm. Is that what?
No, it was, I forgot the name of the actual, I know what
as
you're
a
saying,
doctor, he's concocting an elixir to wipe her out without a trace.
Right, right.
So, and then he sees her tied up, covered in pig's blood, and he's both of them tied up, covered in blood, in a violent scene. And he didn't do anything. He didn't flinch. He didn't do anything to stop it.
Are you amazed that this is a medical professional? This is a medical professional, a person we entrust. He even called himself a healer at one point in this case. That he's the one who would be on trial for this?
Well, I know as an attorney, I could never be a doctor because I don't do well with blood. But maybe that's can go to explaining why he didn't flinch when he saw people covered in blood.
Isn't there something interesting about the fact that you have people in these cases who think they can get away and not be caught by the police because they're hiring someone else to do the dirty work?
Right. So they think maybe they cannot have a direct link to forensic evidence to the death. They think that they can outsmart the law. They think people that hire, it seems to be hitmen, they're more educated. They don't want to do the dirty work. They want to hire someone else to do it, and they think they can get away with it, and that they have enough money to just pay someone off to do it for them, and there won't be a direct link of forensic evidence.
Because that's really, you would be paying the hitman to take the heat. You're paying the hitman to take the risk.
To take the risk, and
right.
Hopefully it's not traceable. But in a lot of cases, as we've been seeing, these are a lot of undercover cops are posing as hitmen to catch you.
Yeah, it's an interesting case. So how, before we play the defense's opening statements, how do you defend this case? How do you defend Leon Jacob?
If I were his defense attorney, I would probably instruct him not to take the stand. Mm-hmm. I don't think he can do himself any service by talking. Already there's enough recordings that aren't easy, and to subject yourself to cross-examination to probe why you said certain things that are contradictory is just going to open a whole can of worms. The best way to defend the case would try to make the prosecution prove the case beyond any and all reasonable doubt, and then to poke holes on the intent. I think it's a really tough case, though. The facts are against him, that they have the recordings, they have the pictures after the fact. They have proof that he didn't do anything to try to stop it. I think that's the key. He didn't do anything to try to stop it.
And we are going to play the hitman, the alleged hitman, on the stand a little bit later. But yeah, that's a key point that you made.
But what's important to know is it's not a crime to get mad and want to form the idea that I want someone dead.
Right.
the crime happens when you take acts to complete it, or you don't do anything to stop it as it's really coming to completion.
So in other words, if I were to understand this correctly, if Leon Jacob or anybody in this situation were really to take acts towards hiring someone to kill someone, but then they somehow stop it and say cancel everything, would they be found guilty?
It wouldn't be. It could be solicitation, conspiracy. There could be other charges. Depending on how far the act was taken.
Right.
But in this case, it seems like they showed it as it's done, it's completed, look, they're dead, they're tied up, she's been kidnapped, we took care of it.
So from beginning to end, we want to capture
this one rises to that threshold. But in another circumstance where it's really incompleted, you could be charged with just conspiracy or attempt.
Right, attempts, Right.
And inchoate crime. Inchoate crime is incomplete.
Right. Okay, everybody. Well, let's see how the defense did. We're going to play for you right now the beginning part of the defense's opening statement. Take a look.
Good morning. Words matter. The words that are spoken, they have meaning. They have definition. But it's only the person who speaks those words that knows what the meaning is behind them. And that's what this case all comes down to. There were three speakers: Leon Jacob, Valerie McDaniel, and Officer Duran. They were all speaking. They were all trying to tell their story that they want to be told. They're all fighting for the control, for that authority, to give definition to what they want to happen. And finally, you will see throughout the entirety of this trial the one egregious efforts that Officer Duran went to just to force his narrative. Now, as my co-counsel George Palm just introduced, my name is Matthew Pospisil, and together, me and George stand here today proud to represent Leon Jacob. Leon Jacob, say the rest. Mr. Jacob here, he's a Houstonian, he's a PhD, and above all, he's a father. Now, like many of us here today, Leon's made some mistakes in life. But just because he's made those mistakes, some things that you will not agree with, does not make him guilty of solicitation of capital murder.
I want to go through the timeline of the events, and I want to make sure that everybody can follow. Is that too small for you all? Can you follow? All right. We have a timeline of audio conversations that take place between the undercover agent and Leon Jacobs. On March the 7th, Leon, in conversations with the undercover, can you see? In conversation with the undercover says, all right, I just need her to leave Houston and things are going to be okay. I want her out of Houston. Why? Because he doesn't want her here as a witness against him. And that's something that we have to accept. I want you to remember many of the things that we talked about in voir dire. We talked about the fact that the implication of Valerie taking her own life. How does that impact, in your mind, the guilt or innocence of Leon Jacob, who sits before you today? What do we know going through the mind of Valerie McDaniel at the time she decided to kill herself? Do we know anything about whether or not she was on narcotics? Do we know anything about any statements she may have made? Do we know about any statements she may have made that were recorded?
Speaking something outside the record that the judges already ruled on.
Do we, there will be testimony presented to you about Valerie McDaniel and her participation in this episode for which Leon Jacob stands trial. I want you to go back in the jury room after you heard all the evidence. Apply the law to the facts as you decided them to be, and make a determination after you have duly deliberated at the close of the evidence in this case that the state has not met its burden of proof that the defendant in fact and in law is not guilty of the offenses of solicitation of capital murder. Thank you very much.
That's the defense opening statements in the Leon Jacob case, a case that we're recapping here on Law and Crime. Again, this is really an incredible case about a former Houston doctor who was on trial for 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder. One was to try to kill his ex-girlfriend, Megan Veracas, and the other was to kill his new girlfriend's ex-husband, Mac McDaniel. Really disturbing details, but a really incredible case nonetheless. Again, I'm here with attorney Carissa Kranz. We were talking in the break. One of the interesting things is the evidence presented in this case, seemingly overwhelming evidence against this man. One of them is the recorded conversations. Now, people hear secret recordings and they automatically think, how is this legal? So I ask you, how is this legal?
Right. Well, legalities always hinge on technicalities, right?
Did you just come up with that?
I just came up with that.
That's a good one.
So, in this case, he was recorded in a public restaurant, and then a second time when he was already in custody in jail. Those conversations are legally recorded and can be and are being used against him.
Right.
In a public restaurant, I believe it was the Olive Garden, there is an expectation that you can be photographed, there's going to be surveillance video, there are people around you that can hear you, someone can have a wiretap, and you're in a public place and you don't have the same reasonable expectation of privacy that you would have in your home or on a phone call that's a private call. That's why when you speak to, AT&T or Comcast or any one of those big customer service centers, they will ask you, they will let you know, hey, you're on a recorded line. May we proceed with the call? You have to be put on notice and agree to that. But in this case, because the call was in...
You know what, Carissa? I think we're getting some ambient noise, so let's go to our next clip in the Leon Jacob case.
This witness has not been sworn in yet, Judge.
Raise your right hand, please, sir.
Do you swear or affirm that your testimony before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, from the state, please.
How you doing this morning, Mr. Kubash?
Fine.
And could you just state your name and spell it for the record, please?
I'm Felix Michael Kubash, Felix, Michael, Michael, Kubash, Kubosh.
And how are you employed, sir?
I am a city council member for the last 5 years. I work for the city of Houston as a council member. I'm an elected official. And I'm a Harris County bail bondsman for the past 21 years.
Maybe can we ask that Mike pull up a little closer?
Yeah, can you sit a little bit closer to the microphone?
Okay.
Better? Thank you. So, you're a council person, you said, for 5 years?
Yes, sir.
And what area do you represent?
The entire city of Houston.
Okay.
I'm an at-large council member.
You're at large, okay. And you have another business you run as well, correct?
Yes, sir. I own a bail bonding business called Kubosh Bail Bonds.
And how long have you been doing that for?
21 years.
And just so that the jury's a little bit familiar with what happens, somebody pays you a portion of a bond, you post the entire bond, and the person bonds out of jail.
That's correct.
Anytime in late February, early March of last year, do you recall ever coming into contact with the defendant, Leon Jacob?
February the 23rd, 2017 at 4 p.m. in the afternoon.
Okay. And just so we're clear about who you're talking about, do you see this person, Leon Jacob, in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Can you go ahead and identify by something that he's wearing?
Striped tie and a black suit with a white shirt.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that witnesses identify the defendant?
The record will so reflect.
All right, welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. Now, we are interrupting our feed in the Leon Jacob case because I want to talk about another unbelievable case that we have a live hearing in right now. It's out of New Hampshire. Now, I want you to follow the details of this case because it's truly unbelievable. This is the case of Nathan Carmen. He is accused by family members of not only killing his grandfather, but possibly his mother. And now his other family members, his aunts, are trying to sue him to prevent him from inheriting insurance money, to collect the inheritance money, excuse me. So this unbelievable case where this man is trying to collect certain money from his inheritance, and his family members are saying, you killed him, you shouldn't get the money. Let's listen in live to this court.
Support that. And that's not what petitioners did. Petitioners just threw a document that was designated confidential subject to protective order out there, not under seal. And their motion to seal it, my understanding is that's patching up their mistake, not so much as a favor to me.
If I read the protective order correctly, it protects documents that contain information that's protected from disclosure by statute, or that should be protected from disclosure as confidential personal information, trade secrets, personnel records, or commercial information. So it's kind of a designated, limited group of documents or things that would be subject to this protective order, not just here's a letter and I want it to be subject to the protective order. So can you tell me which of those categories your response falls under that would allow it to be, in essence, sealed? Well, I guess what I would say, having heard your arguments this morning, Mr. Carmen, I understand what your position is, and I will try to craft any order in such a way that takes that into account.
Okay.
All right. You are, I understand, looking for a lawyer. I hope that goes well for you. I hope you're successful in your real estate deal, if that's what you need to do in order to get counsel. We do have another hearing scheduled in May, so I'm hoping that maybe before that time things will change so that you will have a lawyer at the next hearing.
That's my hope as well.
Okay. All right, I'll take this matter under advisement. I'll get an order out as quickly as I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor. You're all set?
Okay, so this is a bit strange. Let's try to break it down. You saw Nathan Carmen there. Now, his family members, his aunts are saying that he is responsible for the deaths of not only his grandfather, but also his mother. His grandfather was shot in 2013, and his mother, mysteriously, they were on a boat together. He and his mother were on a boat, and she's been missing, and the boat sank. Now, the father, because he has a gun, Mr. Carmen, and the aunt and the family continue want to ask him questions about his gun and what guns he has, and he's pled the Fifth Amendment in regards to that, what guns he actually does have. A federal judge in a case involving the insurance company for the boat who's denied payments because they believe he's responsible for this, they also forced him to answer some questions about this gun. It's a really mysterious case, but an interesting one, especially, let's not forget the fact that Mr. Carmen there, he's representing himself. So when you see a defendant representing himself, it's not always the best thing. Again, let's bring in attorney Carissa Kranz. Okay, so this is an interesting one. The aunts filed a slayer petition basically saying he's not entitled to any money that the grandfather would have left him, because actually the grandfather's money would have gone to the mother, but she's deceased, it would go now to him, but he's not entitled to it because he's the killer. How does this work?
Right. So most jurisdictions in the United States have enacted the slayer statute, which is basically saying that you can be found guilty or you can be found not guilty of killing or murder per the criminal burden beyond any and all reasonable doubt. And even if you're not guilty there, that doesn't mean that you're going to be found not guilty with a civil burden. The slayer statute applies to civil burdens. So even if he was found not guilty criminally, she is pointing to that statute saying, by the preponderance of the evidence, we still feel there's overwhelming evidence by just 51% that he likely did this, and therefore he's not entitled to any inheritance because we believe more likely than not he is guilty.
We saw that in the O.J. Simpson case, right? He was found not guilty, but he was found guilty in he was found liable in a civil court, right? So under that preponderance of the evidence standard. So it's interesting when you see these kinds of cases, you might think, oh, they get off scot-free, or in this case, no criminal charges are filed. And by the way, we don't know any details about this case. We don't know if he was responsible for any of the deaths of either of these two people. But there is another avenue, the civil court.
There's the civil court. And the reason these statutes are in place is because we don't. The law is intended to give people motive to not kill, right? So if someone stands a lot of financial gain, if someone passes, all the time in these trials, it's follow the money, follow the money. What was the motive for the killing? Why would someone be more valuable dead than alive? So in this case, you know, it seems like he was hoping to stand a financial gain. I don't know a lot of...
His grandfather was a multimillionaire.
Right. So he was standing a huge financial gain, but now he's wanting to be entitled to it because he was found not guilty. But per the civil burden, they're trying to divest his inheritance, which they should win on.
Right. Yeah, I think he is eventually going to have to answer questions about this missing gun. He has a Sig Sauer rifle, and I think a federal judge has said that because of this insurance company's claims that they don't have to pay the money on the boat, he's eventually going to have to answer questions about where is this gun, what happened, and that might open up some criminal liability. Is that a possibility?
It could open up, well, he was already found not guilty, right?
Well, charges haven't been brought again. No criminal charges have been brought against him. But because of now what's happening in the civil courtroom, if evidence is unearthed that he had something to do with the deaths of either of these two people, criminal charges could be brought against him.
As long as there's no double jeopardy that could attach, criminal charges could be brought against him. And insurance companies will do everything in their power to deny a claim and delay a claim, too, to not pay.
Right.
So I don't know enough about this trial yet. I'd have to watch it more, but absolutely, if he is found guilty civilly by just 51%, he should not get any of the insurance funds, and the insurance company is going to deny that. And if they unearth stuff in the civil trial, there can be criminal charges brought if they're new charges.
A unique case, unique details, but that's what we cover here on Law and Crime, the cases that are a little bit different. And speaking of cases that are a little bit different, before we went to the Nathan Carman case, we've been following the Leon Jacob case. Again, this case is also increasingly bizarre when you listen to each account about what this man, this former doctor, was accused of doing, basically trying to hire a hitman to kill two people. Now, before we went to the Nathan Carman courtroom, we were playing you the testimony of Felix Michael Kubash. He is a bail bondsman. Now, here's what happened right before we went to the courtroom. Mr. Jacob went to his office to find out where was Motaz. Motaz was the man that Mr. Jacob tried to hire to take care of business here. And we know from Motaz that he took the money and left. He took Jacob's money and left, felt that there was something weird going on. And we know that Michael Kubash is the bail bondsman in regards to Mr. Motaz, so he tried to find out what was going on here. Mr. Kubash is the man that alerted police to what was going on. So when you listen to him, and we're going to continue playing his testimony, he is the man who actually unearthed this whole situation. Let's listen in to about his interactions with the defendant.
For you, so he provided a number to you, which you plugged into your computer, and you found a record of you having talked to somebody at the phone number he had given you.
That's correct.
But it was unclear based on the records you had on your computer who that person was.
That's correct.
Okay. Did he ever mention to you the reason why he was so insistent on finding Zach?
He told me he'd paid this man a lot of money, Zach, a lot of money to take care of this matter. And I said, well, what matter? He said, well, she can't be testifying against me, and she'll be embarrassed to me and my family. And my mother's a lawyer here in town, well-known lawyer, and this would be a great embarrassment. And she needs to go back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I said, well, sir, who are you talking about? And so I got on the computer and I pulled up the charging instrument on the stalking charge, and I said, are you talking about Megan Veracos? And he said, yes. And I said, well, sir, you can't have any contact with her, and you can't have any contact with her through anyone else.
Why did you feel that way?
Because the phone number was in my computer that he had given me, and for somebody to give you a 10-digit phone number and it come up in your computer when you type it in, it just didn't make sense to me. How was I getting involved in this? Why was I being involved?
And did you relay all the information to Assistant Chief Fenner?
Yes, I did.
And were you eventually put in contact with any investigators from the Harris County District Attorney's Office?
Yes, while I was with the mayor in Kingwood, I received a call from an investigator, I believe by the name of Larry, with the Major Crimes Division of the Harris County District Attorney's Office.
And did you relay the same information to that investigator that you've told the jury today?
Yes, I did.
Okay, let's try to understand exactly what was going on in the mind of Mr. Jacob. Okay, again, I'm here with Carissa Kranz. This guy, the defendant, reveals everything to this complete stranger, a man in government, a man who eventually unearthed this whole plot, a man that called the chief of police. Why would Jacob do this?
Why would he do any of this is the bigger question. Why would he hire a cop to be a hitman? Why would he talk in jail to his mom on a recorded line and get himself into more trouble? If anything, that guy is the more credible witness on the stand than Leon Jacob himself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was the man who unearthed this whole plot. He's the reason why further steps weren't taken to actually kill Megan Veritas.
Yes, because he was going based on intuition of how aggressive Leon Jacob was, and he felt like he had to go to the police because he felt like there was something up that needed to be investigated further.
He said on the stand it was like talking to the devil himself.
Right, that was an interesting line.
Is there no objection to that, or how come the defense couldn't object to that?
Well, that was direct. That was his direct. That's his direct impression of. I mean, I guess that they could object that that's speculation. What is it like to really talk to the devil? How would he know that? They didn't object, but based on his own direct communication with the defendant himself, he certainly felt like he was speaking to pure evil.
Right. And what we're going to play later, I know you talked about if you were the defense attorney for Leon Jacob, you wouldn't put him on the stand, but anybody who follows this case knows that Leon Jacob did take the stand. We're going to play that for you later.
Right. I don't think that anyone could control Leon Jacob. I think he was going to take the stand. He was going to talk. He thinks he can get himself out of anything. He wasn't listening to his mother, who told him not to talk. He thought he is above the law and could hire a hitman. I think that Leon Jacob can't get out of his own way. And even if the defense attorney told him not to take the stand, I believe he had more than one defense attorney too, if I remember properly. So, even whatever a defense attorney said, he probably didn't have complete control over his client.
Well, I think the best way to understand Mr. Jacob is to go to a key figure in this case, the man that he hired to do what he says was just to get rid of or talk to do his dirty work. This is Motaz, okay? This is the man, this is that former U.S. Army soldier who, again, posed as a hitman, and you have to try to understand, he is being classified by the defense as a con man himself. But the prosecution really loved this witness because the police worked with him along with Mr. Kubash in unfoiling this murder-for-hire plot. I'm a little confused when I read this case what his intentions were in the beginning. He took the money and just ran. I mean, we're going to play it for our viewers in a little bit, but I'm confused as to what his guy's intentions were at the very beginning.
The undercover cop?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was to see how far the defendant was really willing to take it. And to take, once he took the money, the currency exchange was there, which was one step closer to completing the act of finishing the commission of the crime.
Right.
So first there was the solicitation, then there was the exchange of money, then there was the discussion on details, and then there was the pictures afterwards showing that the crime was actually completed. How far was the defendant really going to go to see that they were out of his way and that his medical license and life wasn't going to be in jeopardy and that he wasn't going to be slandered?
Well, let's listen in. This, again, is the hitman that Leon Jacob hired. Let's listen in.
Could you tell us how you came into contact with Mr. Jacob initially?
I was called by a friend of a friend, and her name is Laura. We met before briefly, but my friend apparently told her about my history in the military, and basically told her that I'm his best friend. So the day that...
Okay, let me stop you there.
Okay.
The person that you're talking about, when you say Laura's a friend of a friend, what friend is it that you're talking about?
His name is Kenneth.
Okay. And how do you know Kenneth, or how did you know Kenneth?
Kenneth was a friend that I met at University of Houston, and we were best friends, and he was he was a lot older than me, but we kind of clicked at the university, and ever since we've been, hanging out. And
was he a student at the same time you?
no, he was working there.
Okay, he worked at the university.
Yes.
Okay. So from the time that you were at the university through the time that you graduated and up until last year, you two remained friends.
Yes, till he actually passed away.
Were the two of you ever living together? Was there ever a roommate arrangement?
Whenever I was at University of Houston, he actually stayed with me for 2 months. Yeah.
And you mentioned something a moment ago, and I wanted to make sure that everybody heard it. You said he passed away.
Yes. The night before Laura contacted me, he had a stroke and passed away. And I had his stuff, his phone. And whenever Laura called him, I answered. I went to tell her what happened, and then she told me about, the situation.
And my question was, did he bring anything with you to show that he was serious about what he wanted with Megan?
Yeah.
Did he bring anything with him?
Sorry, with him. Yes, sir.
Yes, he did. On the phone call, I asked him to bring $2,500 to see how serious he is, and if he did, then I actually figured he's really serious.
And he brought that money?
Yes.
And did he give it to you that night?
Yes.
When the first meeting with the defendant ended, what was the plan going forward from there?
The plan for me was to actually find out a way to protect Megan and to see how I can approach this the best way I could, and to guarantee that I keep Megan out of his reach.
Okay, let me stop you there. Did you know who Megan was?
No.
Okay. What information did you have on Megan at that time?
At that time, basically, before I met him, I didn't have except her name. Laura did mention that she worked at a hotel, but most of the information that I gathered to convince Leon Jacob that I am someone that is capable of basically of being a mercenary, to convince him that I'm a mercenary. I actually gathered most of the information about him. And whenever I met with him, I gave him the information. But when it comes to Megan, I told him I will not share any information about Megan because you might just take it yourself or, outsource it. It was a way to cover.
All right, sorry about that little snafu there, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk a little bit more about the Leon Jacob case. I want to bring in Carissa Kranz. So you're seeing this guy, Moataz Aziz, okay, again, a little bit of a weird profession here. He was contacted by a family friend of Leon Jacob, and he gets involved and finds out about this, what Leon Jacob wants to do or what he thinks he wants to do, but he takes his money and disappears. Sounds a little bit like a con man, and then he only really gets contacted by police. My understanding of it is when Mr. Kubash, his bail bondsman, actually gets involved and alerts the police. But should we be praising this guy? I mean, he did actually work with the police to help bring down Leon Jacob, but his story is a bit of an interesting one.
Yeah, he took the money, and then he didn't go through with the plot, but it can't really be theft because how can you be charged for theft for taking the money and not committing an illegal crime? It's illegal. It's an illegal contract. So it's void. You can't have a legal contract to take money and go kill someone and then say, I'm going to take the money and keep it, but not kill them, because that's an illegal contract. So he legally hasn't done anything wrong, and he's on the stand corroborating the culpability of guilt for Leon Jacob on how far and how calculated he was in actually hiring someone and soliciting someone to commit these murders.
What I think is working for the prosecution so far in this case is when you have at least two witnesses who've come on the stand so far, their stories match up. So it's not like when you see a lot of cases, and we covered the Tex MacGyver case, where it's still a little bit of confusion in terms of what happened in the car and what was his behavior afterwards. or even before. But here, you're hearing the story from two different witnesses. They both had contact with Leon Jacob, but for different reasons. And it sounds like the same kind of thing. And so when you hear later on the defense saying, this was all a miscommunication, people weren't understanding it, well, you might confuse one person.
Right.
But 2 people, 3 people, the police, that's the stretch.
And that's why this case is going to meet the burden of beyond any and all reasonable doubt, because of all these circumstances. They really do stack up. And when you compare it to the McIver case, which we've been covering for the last 2 weeks, that case is on a totally different level of reasonable doubt. Things are inconsistent. It doesn't add up, and it probably doesn't meet the burden. But this case, there's consistent statements, there's different witnesses, there's corroborating evidence, and even Leon Jacob himself is not denying that he had these conversations with these people. The only thing that Leon Jacob seems to say is, I didn't intend for anyone to get hurt. But he also intended for anything to be done, whatever had to be done, to ensure that he and his profession didn't get hurt.
So in other words, even if he didn't say the words, I want her dead, you can still find him guilty.
Yes, he implied that whatever you had to do, and he didn't say, I want her dead. He flip-flopped. He flip-flopped, and he also gave very clear ways on how to kill her, or kill anyone without a trace, which is cold-blooded murder. And he did nothing to stop the acts, and he helped give advice and details on how to complete the acts. So this is guilty.
How important, though, is likability? So he takes the stand. I'm not going to talk too much about it because he is going. We're going to play that, but likability.
He's a narcissist.
Yeah.
He thinks that he's a ladies' man, and he thinks he can talk his way out of anything and have swag, and that a jury's going to like him because he's used to being liked, and he's a doctor.
I mean, he's a heartthrob. Okay, let's just.
Yeah. But, I think that he thinks he's likable.
Right.
But when you listen to him and you listen to him double talk, it's insulting because your intelligence is insulted.
Right. Well, let's listen a little bit more to try and understand what's actually happening in this case. Again, this is the continuation of the testimony of Motaz Aziz. Let's listen.
Yes, sir. So in regards to Megan, all you really knew at that point was her name.
Yes.
And that she worked at a hotel.
Yes. When I met with Leon Jacob, he showed me a picture and a license plate of her car.
Okay, so he showed you a picture and a license plate of her car.
He showed me a picture with him and her, and then another picture of her license plate of her car.
I want to kind of back up to the first plan where you said you had kidnapped Megan, and she showed up to the hearing, and after that, he was still convinced that you were who you said you were.
Yes.
So he believed that you actually, your impression was that he believed that you had actually kidnapped her and you told her to leave, but she didn't.
Yes.
Now, how was it over the next several days or weeks, how was it that you were able to convince him, and what were you telling him about the next step in the plan? So if that didn't work, what sort of things were you telling him around the time of the stalking charge about whether you would be able to do anything for him in regards to Megan?
At this point, I was given information about him, but keeping Megan covered in a way that there's no information shared. So I kept on my cover, and my cover was also not to talk too much, so not to give information that is not necessary, and it always made him more it made him more convinced, and he also wanted to be more in control of the situation, which made his focus on me now. He wanted to actually, know me, control me, make sure that I do what it is that he actually wanted. At this point, whenever the stalking charge was coming up so he can go to court, I actually told him that killing her right now is going to come back at you. So I told him I can set her up with a felony. I can send my team, crash her car, plan drugs, and she can get arrested for it. And then she will not show up to the stalking to the court that day, and I'll be dismissed. based on the information of the dismissal, it was him telling me that his lawyer told him that if she doesn't show up, it'll be dismissed.
So you were convincing him that now.
What a complicated legal mess this is. So let's talk a little bit more about the Leon Jacob case as we have this proposed hitman, or this almost hitman, on the stand. Again, I'm here with Carissa Kranz. Okay. One of the aspects that we don't talk about that much, and maybe we should talk about it, is that Valerie McDaniel, who was arrested alongside Leon Jacob, she committed suicide when she got out on bond, basically a few days after. How does that play into this case, both from trying to understand what happened and also from a legal perspective? Does that show something to you?
It could imply consciousness of guilt, which means she felt so guilty and she knew she was guilty and she didn't know what to do, so she decided to end the whole thing and jump off her balcony and put an end to this misery.
Right.
It could also imply that she was just in an environment and under circumstances which her family would point to, that she was more of a victim to the circumstances, and she was overwhelmed and she didn't like being the subject of such a horrific crime, and she felt police entrapment, which there are recordings of her on an iPad which were saved before she jumped off the balcony, where she recorded her perception of what happened that night and why she did certain things, and she says that she wouldn't have wanted the father of her 8-year-old daughter to be dead and hurt. Right. So it is also possible that she just really wasn't stable. She could have had a defense if she was evaluated by a health professional, that maybe she wouldn't have even been competent to stand trial. Maybe she would have had a legal mental defect case.
If she didn't die and both of them were on trial, I wonder if you would have seen a situation where one would have been blaming the other. You know, when we hear Leon Jacob later on when he testifies, he says, I felt pressured to go into this plot when they were mentioning things like murder and how far do you want to take this, and they kept mentioning murder, and here you have these guys that were intimidating, I felt pressure. I wonder if you have a situation where he would say, Valerie, the girl that I love, she kept saying she wanted her ex-husband dead. I was put in an uncomfortable position. I wonder if you would have seen that.
Well, it's common in trials like this for witnesses to start flipping on each other.
Yeah.
It's also, you know, she really should have consulted a lawyer and some mental health help, because it's possible that she could have gotten immunity if she was able to give up information in exchange for testimony, because I don't think she was the more guilty one. I think she was in love with this guy and maybe not the most stable herself, but her testimony could have lent additional insight. However, they would have to make sure and weigh her testimony to make sure it gave more probative insight for a juror to evaluate than they already had. It had to have been new information, and in this case they already have so much information, overwhelming information from multiple witnesses, that I'm not sure her testimony would have been valuable to law enforcement.
Even though no one was killed directly by another human being, there are multiple victims in this case. So you look at the two people that were, you know, the murder for hire victims. But then you also look at Mr. Kubash, who was a victim in his own way, where he was almost trying to be manipulated and pressured by Mr. Jacob. But then you look at her as a victim, so Valerie McDaniel, because her family has a lot of stake in this case. And we heard it a little bit in the beginning of the prosecution's case, where they said her family didn't want her to have anything to do with Jacob, and you could imagine where they want to see some justice in this case as well. Here they could say, this is a man who pressured our daughter to enter into this arrangement.
Yeah, they want to clear her name.
Right.
They want to clear her name, probably not only for her sake, but for their granddaughter's sake. You know, she had an 8-year-old, and the only words we have from her are the recordings that she left, which is a chilling recording that led up to the weeks following when she jumped off the balcony. And like you said, it could show guilt on her part, like she just couldn't live with herself and live with the scenario, and it could also show that she just didn't know what to do and was in a deep depression and needed some help.
people, in terms of legality in the penalty phase, okay, so I'm not going to reveal yet what actually happened in this case, the verdict, but I do have a question. People who face charges for solicitation of capital murder, and this is again in Texas, there's a penalty of life. That's a potential. Why do you see such a severe punishment as it's the same kind of thing if he actually were to commit the murder? Is that why do you see something almost equivalent to that?
Well, he solicited the murder, and they acted like the act was completed, so that raises to the level of murder. And people who should be incarcerated are people who are not productive citizens and pose a danger to the community.
Right.
In this case, Leon Jacob, he may not have killed those two, but if he's in the community, his series of bullying in the past, he's going to kill someone else. This guy can't be rehabbed, and he's not safe.
Let's see what happened. We're going to continue our testimony. This is Motaz Aziz, the purported hitman. Let's listen in.
Did you just mention another plan?
Yes.
About planting drugs in her car?
Yes.
Okay, and that involved a car crash, correct?
Yes, we crashed her car and planned drugs to it.
Did that ever happen?
No.
Okay. Did you ever tell him it happened, much like the last time where you said it had with the kidnapping?
No, I told him that my team was interrupted by cops and they were arrested, and I blamed him for it. His personality is he likes to show off, talk about himself, so I figured he would tell somebody that she would not show up. So I told him, who did you tell? My team is gone, they were arrested, and, you know, I made it as it sounds like a problem, like I'm pissed off. And at this point, I was actually planning to get hard evidence, so I can actually be able to go to the cops and it might be more believable.
Did it appear as though when you told him about this plan gone wrong a second time, did he appear to believe you that it didn't work out, your team had been arrested?
Yes, he did. He believed me.
Does this appear to be you and the defendant outside speaking?
Yes, we were speaking at that time.
And do you recall anything about what the defendant was saying to you at this point, or what the conversation was about?
He was worked up because it was basically it was not resolved till now, and I was ensuring him that Javier that will get the job done. He's one of the best, and he was kind of worked up and pissed off that it didn't happen. Like I didn't get it done, and you know, Megan is still alive.
After this conversation outside the restaurant, do you go back inside?
Yes, we did.
Now, after that meeting, did you have any further contact with the defendant at all?
No, at this point, I handed her over to Javier and the team, and I did not need it to actually go on.
You know what's interesting is when you get the defendant on tape, it kind of limits his options about how to argue. But help me explain that a little bit more. I'm here again with attorney Carissa Kranz. So what we're talking about is you see him on tape. That throws out the window. I don't know Motaz. I've never met him. I don't know anything about him. So he's on tape. We see him talking to him for an extended period of time. We know there's audio recordings of him. Can't deny that he had the conversations. When a defendant is put in a box like that and they have to say, I can't argue away a lot of the stuff, how difficult is that for a defense attorney?
Tough.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, video evidence is the best evidence, and they have video evidence, they have audio evidence in this case. So the defendant really needs to wiggle his way out of this one by coming up with some kind of circumstance or intent that he didn't really mean, which is going to be really hard to prove based on the series of witnesses that we've been hearing on this case. As a defense attorney, I guess they could try to lean on the rules of evidence and trying to not have the video admitted based on not being able to authenticate it,
right,
or as chain of custody issues. But it seems like in this case everything is admissible, and the defendant is caught red-handed, and so he's going to take the stand and explain his way out of it, or at least try to, and get himself more stuck in the mess?
I think he was waiting for that. I think he really wanted to tell his side of the story because, sure, your defense attorney can cross-examine certain witnesses, and we're going to play that again when the defense attorneys actually cross-examine Mr. Aziz. But the question is when the defendant really wants to tell his side of the story. So we'll play that in a little bit. But before we go back into the Leon Jacob case, I just want to preview two other cases that we are covering here on Law and Crime. The first one is the Tex MacGyver case. Again, we've been covering that case week by week, day by day, minute by minute. So we've constantly been covering that case. Now, that will begin again on Monday. Trial is off this week. It's about that prominent attorney, Tex MacGyver, who's on trial for shooting and killing his wife, Diane MacGyver, and he shot her from the back seat of a moving car. She was in the front passenger seat, he was in the back seat, and their good friend Danny Joe Carter was driving. Now, he is saying that this was all a tragic accident, that the gun went off by accident, that he didn't mean for this to happen, he didn't intend to kill his wife, despite the state saying that there was a financial motive at play here, that he didn't like his wife, that they got into a fight, and even trying to insinuate that he was somehow fooling around with the masseuse. I'm giving you all of the prosecution's theories here. He is saying he is completely innocent. He also faces 3 counts of influencing witnesses. That's right, the prosecution believes that he tried to tamper this case. He tried to hide some witness statements. He tried to suppress their statements, and he tried to cover up what he actually did. That is the Claude Tex MacGyver case out of Atlanta. We will continue playing that for you on Monday. We'll be live in the courtroom. Next case I want to preview again is the Ohio v. William Knight case. I mentioned it earlier today. I'm going to talk about it now. Knight is on trial for shooting and killing an unarmed man named Keith Johnson after Knight went to his house to recover what he thought was a dirt bike that was stolen from his son-in-law. He felt an altercation ensued. He felt there was a grave danger to him and his family. He took out his gun and shot this man. However, he is claiming self-defense. If we have it, I'd like to play the short package that we have for the Knight case. It can pretty much explain what it's about. And again, we believe it will start tomorrow. We're carefully monitoring the courtroom. There's a chance it could start today. It might be unlikely, but if it does, we'll make sure to jump into this courtroom. And in a case where you see self-defense, sometimes doesn't work so well for the defendant. We have, again, that package right now. I want to play that for you right now.
The trial for the Streetsboro, Ohio man accused of shooting and killing an unarmed man in a dispute over a stolen dirt bike is set to begin next week. 64-year-old William Knight is charged with murder and assault stemming from an altercation with 24-year-old victim Keith Johnson. The dispute was over a dirt bike reportedly stolen in 2016 from Knight's son-in-law's garage. The victim had the pilfered bike in his possession and was attempting to sell it on Facebook, according to authorities. Knight and his family arranged a meeting with Johnson to discuss the sale of the bike when everything went terribly wrong. Knight alleges the victim tried to run over his daughter Michelle with the dirt bike when confronted with the stolen property.
Ma'am, they tried to kill my daughter. Okay, hold on. Did you just shoot the man? I had to. He tried to run into my daughter. Okay, hold on. Okay.
Johnson's family contends the bike was not stolen and that he purchased it from another seller. Is this a case of self-defense or cold-blooded murder? I'm Rachel Stockman for Law and Crime.
Self-defense versus murder. That's another common theme that we cover here on Law and Crime. So it'll be interesting to see how this case plays out. As soon as we have an update, we'll make sure to let you know. Let's focus our energy back on the Leon Jacob case. That's where we want our prime focus today. We are recapping this entire case. What I'm about to play for you is the cross-examination of this man who pretended to be a hitman. Now, before we go to it, I want to test Carissa real quick. Carissa, if you were cross-examining him, what would you ask?
Well, why did he put up an ad, and how did they find each other, and does he do this to other people? Does he take money and con people and take the money and then not kill, or has he killed?
Well, would you also try to say, hey, listen, did you ever hear my client ask you to actually kill someone? Would you try to go that path?
You could ask directly. Have you? Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
The reason I ask you is we're about to play that cross-examination. So let's see if Carissa's right. She talked about how she would cross-examine this witness. Let's hear how the defense did.
Starting off with, you keep making a mention that Leon needed something to go to his lawyer. He had to show his lawyer. Do you know who that lawyer was by name by chance?
No, I do not.
Okay, but do you know that it was not me or it was not George? At that time, we had his attorneys.
I believe it was a female because he kept on referring to her as her or she told me.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned earlier today that you received a $2,500 cash payment from Leon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall him ever giving you more money?
Yes.
Do you know how much money he did in fact give you?
I remember it was in total $9,980.
You said $9,998?
$80.
$80. Would you be surprised to hear that maybe it was closer to $15,000?
I'm not sure.
But he also gave you 2 Cartier watches, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall the value of those watches?
No, I do not. I did have receipts, and I was turned to the police.
And you told him that you went ahead and you've taken her, but you didn't want to go forward and have them meet.
Yes, I told him that I did have taken her and talked to
Tell
her.
Leon or make statements about how you had to rough her up a little bit. Did you have to hit her, threaten her?
I can't recall the exact words, but I said everything that I can to actually convince him that we actually did talk to her, yes.
So it's safe to assume that during this time period you were trying to sell this con, and then you would have used a statement saying that you had to hit her, she's hysterical, she doesn't want to talk to you right now, to make your persona be what it was?
No, I was actually focusing on protecting Megan, because in the first meeting, he did mention if it doesn't work out, when he talks to her, that he wants her gone.
Interesting.
That's Moataza Z, that purported hitman in Leon Jacob case, a former doctor who, definitely a former doctor, who was on trial for 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder, 1 to try to kill his ex-girlfriend, Megan Veritas, and his new girlfriend's ex-husband, Mac McDaniel. So you see him on the stand, he's being under cross-examination. Carissa, what I think is interesting about that when you watch this is, what is the line between, and I'm so glad he's a con man because this is a great way to explain it. What's the line between somebody like Jacob, who is directing or trying to say he wanted to kill someone, and being manipulated in his own way by a con man who's saying he roughed Megan up or he did this to her? And is there a line there between a defendant who is manipulated either by a con man or police authorities in general? They're manipulated into thinking or doing something, and then they're found on trial for something, as opposed to him being the main cause for it. What is that line?
Well, I guess the legal term for that would be entrapment. If you feel like, but I don't see how a con man can really be entrapping a defendant like Leon Jacob. But yes, you know, Leon Jacob reached out to him, and then the con man is conning him by manipulating the conversation to get more information, which makes it look worse for Leon Jacob, which, you know, and then when the police get involved, the same kind of, you know, the police are going to, you know, they're aware of the dynamics, so they're going to say things to try to get you to further admit and see how far you will go. So there is a fine line in figuring out how far will someone really go with a plot and what is their true intent versus someone manipulating them into agreeing to something, which is, I guess, the girlfriend that jumped off the balcony's family is saying happened to her. She sort of was manipulated into going along with it, and she didn't really mean to, and she was a weak personality.
Now, it's not entrapment because he started this whole thing, right? He set the wheels in motion. He was the one who wanted to have someone talk to Megan or intimidate Megan.
Yeah, but it's not entrapment, but there's points where, you know, Megan said in the conversation with the police in her final recording that, you know, she said, no, can't you just make him be nice to me? And the cop said, no, we can't make anyone be nice to you. So she felt like she was forced to continue along with the plot. Whereas if the officer redirected, she might not have been okay with the whole follow through. Yeah. So I think, yes, there's a point where the act or the commission of the crime can be abandoned. And when you're dealing with characters like con men or police that are trying to figure out how far you'll go, they're not trying to get you to abandon the plot. They're playing into it, and they're trying to keep you focused on it so they can continue to have enough probable cause to bring charges to prosecute a case. They know they're building their case. They know they're getting all the evidence they need to take this case to trial.
Leon Jacob, when he was cross-examined on the stand, they asked him, did you ever say at one point, you know what, let's back off this, I don't like where this is going? And he said, no, not that I'm aware of. Okay,
Right.
so there you go.
Right. Yes.
That's a really good point. All right, let's continue playing for you. This is the cross-examination of this hitman. Take a look.
In the interest of protecting Megan, but you went out of your way to make sure there was no record of any conversation. Is that correct?
Yes, because if I actually leave any evidence, you might suspect me.
It's correct. And you also wanted to make sure that all messages sent were deleted. Is that correct?
I do not recall that.
You use an app, Wicker, that deletes all text messages.
I honestly cannot recall that.
You also had a way of sending an email chain. Is that not correct?
Yes.
Where you would log into his email, compose a draft, and then delete it. Is that correct?
I gave him the email thing, but I never actually sent an email or wrote an email.
You would log
Yeah,
in.
it was supposed to be to actually show that I know what I'm doing. Give him basically, it was a tool for him to actually believe that I'm a mercenary, a hitman, and I know what I'm doing. Yes.
You're going to actively sell this comp. Is that correct?
It's actually not. Well, it is it was actually an operation to keep my cover. Yes. So if it was to keep a cover, it's called con. It is. Yes, that was actually.
To sell the comp.
To sell what he needs to believe. Yes.
Did you ever have a conversation with Leon expressing Megan's desire to go back to Pittsburgh?
I did tell him. Yes, she was convinced to go to Pittsburgh. Yes.
That she wanted to go to Pittsburgh.
That I convinced her to go to Pittsburgh.
But all that she needed was money.
I'm sorry. What?
That she wanted to go to Pittsburgh, but she needed more money to go to Pittsburgh.
I don't recall.
Did you ever tell Leon or inform Leon that you were in the process of buying plane tickets to get her to go to Pittsburgh because she wanted to leave?
Yes, I did say that. I remember that now.
In fact, you even had hired a person or a guy of yours to get on the plane to follow her to Pittsburgh. Is that not correct?
I did say that, yes. I told him that my team is actually going to make sure she left to Pittsburgh. So he can back off, and if she shows up to court, then it's all clear.
Okay, so Leon was left under the impression that Megan wanted to go to Pittsburgh.
At this point, I convinced him that, yes.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Nothing further, Judge.
Well, that was the testimony of Motaz Aziz, that purported hitman that got involved in this murder for hire plot by Leon Jacob. Carissa, as we were listening to this, I couldn't help but wonder, this is a doctor. Couldn't the argument have been made that this guy, a successful doctor, if he was really going to try to kill someone, you pay such a small fee to have someone killed? I mean, what's believable here? You're going to pay that small fee to have someone killed, or to have someone located, to maybe intimidate them, maybe have them come to a room where you could speak to them, but to have someone murdered? Couldn't an argument be made there?
Some people can hire someone for murder for less than the $10,000 that is being offered here. And if you look into Mr. Leon Jacobs' record, he has a previous bankruptcy. He was $200,000 in debt. He was a failed doctor. One of the complaints of his ex-girlfriend was that he was laying around the house too much. He was being unproductive. So I believe that that's an amount that he was scraping to come up with, which was used as collateral with watches and other, memorabilia.
But he did come from a wealthy family.
Well, you're going to ask your family to come up with the funds so you can off your girlfriend. And
that's not a conversation I think anybody wants to have.
Just saying.
And as we listened to this, and we were listening to the conclusion of his testimony, you can't help but wonder as well, he's a con man. I mean, there's no way to explain it. Why did he come to the police when he got the money? You know, he didn't first come to the police. He had to be contacted and tracked down by the police. So how much do we have to say this guy is somehow responsible for what happened, or is he not?
I don't think he's responsible for what happened because he didn't follow through with it, and then it adds more guilt to Leon Jacob because when that didn't exactly work out, Leon Jacob still pursued his plan. The thing is yes, he took the money. He's a con man. He took the money. He now claims he was his goal was to protect the victims, but
he didn't contact her.
No, he took the money, and it's an illegal contract. He can't get in trouble for taking the money. It's not theft. It's not theft of services because it's not a legal service to say, I'm going to give you money in exchange for this currency. You need to go kill someone.
Right.
There's no way to hold him to, no court is going to hold him to the contract saying you must return the money or you must complete the murder.
It's a very good point.
So
and
he's a con man.
He's a con man, and they also tried to attack his credibility at the end there. That
right,
was an
by
interesting
bringing
tactic.
up, right, so in all trials, that's a normal thing to do, and it's to bring up any felonies that have been convicted in any crimes of dishonesty, because that attacks the credibility of the witness, and the jurors are to take in all the evidence and weigh its credibility to see how much they should believe the testimony, which is considered direct evidence. Testimony is evidence of that witness.
Exactly. Well, Carissa, I know our time together is coming to an end, so thank you very much for coming on today.
Of course,
Any
thank
final
you.
thoughts about the Leon Jacob case before we continue playing it for our audience?
It'll be fun when you reveal how guilty or if he's guilty and what the sentence, he might face.
There you go. Thank you so much for coming on.
Of course. Thank you.
All right, everybody. We are going to continue playing for you the testimony of various witnesses here in the Leon Jacob case. We're moving on to Officer Gutierrez from the Houston Police Department. Let's play that for you right now.